Hello chickies, welcome to the Fully Booked Penguin channel. I am Hannah and today we are wrapping up April for my reading. I could have worded that differently, but I didn't. And we're running with it because this is going to be a chaotic wrap up to the month. You may be asking, why so much energy? Well, when life gets you down, you find joy wherever the Lord giveth. And currently, you won't see it, but all I can show you. This is my cameraman for the day. And for some reason, I can't help it. He's just so joyful. He's so happy. And he's just such a small being. Adorable. Anyway, so he's my cameraman. And that is how we are going to get through this chaotic video with utmost joy from the Lord, but also that little plushie. Alright, so in April, I read a total of 9 books. That was 2,392 pages. Average time to finish was 5 days. It was mostly light-hearted and funny books, with adventurous being next up, and hopeful. That's cute. It was all fiction. No surprise there to any of us. Romance was the biggest genre, with fantasy and contemporary as next. And the average rating was 3.61. So it was kind of a middling month. But you know, I read, which was better than the previous month where I think I binged right at the end, but it was a struggle. And this month, really, again, it was start of month, end of the month, because I was suffering for weeks on end. Again, part of the chronic illness life. Just gotta go with it. Now we get to see what those 9 books were. So the first 4 books I read this month were kind of all in the same series. One of them is a novella. And so we may as well review them all together as a little cluster. And that is the Oakley Island Romances by Jenny Proctor and Emma St. Clair. So I have been reading some of their Appies series, which they alternate writing the books, but in this series they wrote it together. They co-wrote the books. And so we have Eloise and the Grump next door, Merritt and her childhood crush, Sadie and the Bad Boy Billionaire, and Izzy and her off-limits love. So, with 334 pages, we started with Eloise and the Grump next door. And it is a contemporary romance, and it is a closed door. So in this, we are following Eloise, where her grandmother has died, and she's left her sort of, I don't know, estate, her building, to her granddaughters, and it's on Oakley Island. They haven't really been in contact with their grandma since grandma's son and their mother divorced, and it was a bit messy and all over the place. They don't get along with the dad, and neither did the grandma. That's why it's skipping him and going straight to the girls. But part of their thing is that they have to renovate this beach house estate, and one of them has to always be living at this place to oversee the renovations. And so, being the one that isn't currently needed elsewhere, she's just finished university or college, I don't know what they call it, and so she's the spare one, and so she moves in. Now there's this lawyer who is handling the process, making sure they do it so that they can get everything underway, and he has known of them, and he was close with the grandma, and so he's like, these girls haven't even visited their grandma recently, and yet here they come to collect her fortune. And he kind of judges them at first, which they were kids when the whole divorce went through, especially the youngest Eloise. They all had their reasons, but at first he was a bit standoffish, but also attracted to Eloise. Here's the thing, I was in a book slump when I started this book, and it was a goofy fun time. It wasn't really hard reading. I could read it quickly. I think I read it in a day. The side characters were really the ones carrying the humour and the plot through this. We had a pelican randomly in their house. We had the other ones popping in and out, and really they carried the humour of it because it's a rom-com, I believe. Jake is the lawyer, okay, going forward. Okay, I don't know where to put this so I'm not constantly looking down. Beautiful. Okay, so the communication in this wasn't communicating. And Lo is quite possibly the most talented at being clumsy female lead I have seen in a while. And she manages to do this clumsiness always when the grumpy lawyer Jake is around. So that is a talent. Imagine being so confident, able to do stuff, and then the moment that you hear Jake on the wind, you're like, oh, let me trip down the stairs, you know? But they had a few letters between the grandma and Eloise and through Jake to Eloise, and that was fun. And the banter was kind of cute at times as well. I did go off in my own head several times. The first, I made grandma write Eloise a letter that was so heart-rendering that I ended up crying at it. And then when I got to the review, I was like, wait, is the book sad or was I sad? I was the sad one. Also, she is super forgiving. I am not forgiving when it comes to fictional characters, and she was. So I would have made him suffer a little bit more. Also, it's a quite a large age gap, which you don't really notice for most of it, but it is mentioned, and you're like, oh. So if you don't like that or can't ignore that, probably not for you. They don't mention it a lot though, so you can ignore it, but it is there. It was just a light-hearted, closed-door, weirdly funny, light-hearted time. So that was Eloise in the Grump Next Door. And then I dived into the next one in the trilogy with the novella, and it was Merritt and her childhood crush. And in this one we are following Merritt, who is kind of a very business, very serious, doesn't have a lot of fun. She's just a bit of a workaholic, but for some reason she does lose her job. Somehow something happens. It's kind of goldfished away. But something happens, so she goes to take over from Eloise, because Eloise goes off to college for a bit. Kerfuffle. They have to swip and swap around a lot. But at the island, you see, the reason she doesn't especially love being there is because she once had a crush on, he had a weird name, Hunter? Beard? Yep, Hunter. Yep. Classic bearded, grumpy man. They had, like, a romance in the past, but when they moved away due to divorce, Merritt sort of was a bit harsh to Hunter, and Hunter went off and made maybe perhaps a mistake that wasn't a mistake. He ended up off with another girl and ended up marrying her and having a child with her, and our girl went to, you know, fix things one day thinking this, and she came across the wedding. So that kind of broke her little heart, even though she admits she kind of broke it herself. Didn't really love Merritt's character. It's one of those driven business women, but then she's secretly might actually want to just be a family girl with the house and the island. I don't know. The thing with having a grumpy, grunty hunter lead, male lead, is that there isn't necessarily miscommunication. There's just no communication. Especially when your female lead is also a grumpy, quiet type. You're just like, just speak to each other. And outside of Merritt's embarrassing self-denial, you know, I definitely am not, kind of, but you are, situations. She did own her own mistakes and apologise. And honestly, the side animals, because Hunter also runs an animal rescue, because of course he does, the animals were okay. They were kind of just mischievous little beings, and not quite as good as the pelican in number 1. But, you know, not everyone can be Frank the Pelican. Anyway, so it was pretty much, I just wanted them to talk. Just talk, you two silent beings. Communicate. There wasn't miscommunication, there was no communication, as I said. That was book 2 in the series. Then we go back to book 3, which is Sadie and the Bad Boy Billionaire. Correct, Hannah, you got it right. Ding, 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 ding. Now, in book 1 and 2, we do get hints and sort of showing of the beginnings of Sadie, and I think he's Benedict King, or Cucumber Patch, or Cumberbatch, as we call him. And he is a billionaire, of course. He is rich, so he invites models over and has models on his boat, and etc, etc. And she's like, oh, another rich guy with a boat. You know, it starts off like that, and they have banter and back and forth throughout the other 2 books. But when we get to this one, look, Sadie is in a bit of trouble, not with the law, but because she is on the side of the law. She may have crossed some bad guys, not really crossed, just sort of messed up the hornet's nest of a bad organization. So she has to be in hiding. And who better to hide with then Cucumber Patch on his boat. After seeing them in book 1 and 2, I was excited to see their dynamics because they had a banter and they had stuff going on, and I was excited to see sort of some of those scenes from their point of view because I thought that would be interesting. But you don't get any of the stuff from previously. You're just set in after the other two have gotten together, and Sadie comes down for the opening of the retreaty thing. And, of course, Benedict is there. They decide they like each other, but they can't possibly tell each other that. No, because they both have past. Here's the thing, I liked Ben through most of the book. He's one of those purposefully misunderstood bad boy playboys, billionaires. The ones that are like, yeah, I put on this front so that people think I'm this, but I'm not really this. Even though in being not really this, just putting on this front, I am actually being that thing that I'm pretending to be. You know, it's one of those ones where you're like, you can say you're pretending the whole time, but at the same time, you are still having models on your boat and etc. etc. While putting up the front, you are living that life. But we kind of hit a rocky patch, and the same went for Sadie and even the sisters. We just hit a point and everyone just lost their minds. The only people who didn't lose their minds was Jake and Hunter. Those two lads held it together. Those two had good advice for Benedict. They kind of reasoned on behalf of Sadie and all that stuff. They were kings of communication and, you know, putting them together again. I've got a line here which said, Jake and Hunter gave excellent advice while being funny, and they handled the 80% mark drama like the good kings they are. Which is funny, because Ben's last name is King. Anyway, that drama there, I hated. It turned me into hating both Eloise and Merritt, because I was like, why are you so... Like, they made mistakes in book 1 and 2, and yet they're bagging out Sadie for miscommunication or not communicating and running away. And I'm like, excuse me? Did you see what you did in the previous books, girls? Have a bit of grace. Support your girl. She'll come to a realization if you just be nice about it. Just be like, okay, you're going through some stuff. Your own brain is working against you. But come in. We're all fam. Let's work through this. But that didn't happen. It's like, ruin the previous characters, except for the two male characters. The two male characters, which I was like, they're okay, but they're just male characters. And in this one, I was like, good lad. Because Sadie was in a bit of trouble, they had some agents with them from a random branch of the government. And one of these agents was Daniels. And he was just a silent little being, and he hated birds. Despised them. And we don't get any reasoning why Daniels hates birds, but he's so silent. He doesn't say anything until the very end, where he says something along the lines of, maybe birds aren't as bad as I once thought, or like something like that. And you're like, what a cute bean, but also, why the bird hate, Daniels? After that, we get to the novella, Merritt's stepdaughter and Eloise's, like, nephew-in-law. And honestly, I gave it 3.5 stars. I'm not sure whether that's quite correct. Izzy, the stepdaughter, has been in love with whatever his name is, Liam, from book 1, since they were kids growing up. And then he randomly shows up to her workplace after sort of ghosting her for a while. And things kick off very quickly. They're suddenly very romantic. And of course they had the families interfering and wanting them together, but then suddenly things go quiet and they're like, what's going on there? Maybe they've finally given up because Liam's off dating this other girl and she's trying to move on. And here's the thing with the novella, there was no bad communication moments. There were dumb past decisions, but in the moment, no miscommunication. There was just a lot of making out. And it really didn't have any depth or wow moments. But it is just a Christmas. It is a Christmas novella. So I don't think it's meant to be that deep. But at the same time, it kind of ruined Liam and Izzy as characters, because you see them as these kids and all of a sudden they're grown-ups and making weird decisions, even though Liam was supposedly in love with Izzy the whole time. He went and dated for this other girl and brought her to Christmas or whatever it was, and that was the moment he was looking between his girlfriend and Izzy and was like, yeah, Izzy's the one for me, and promptly broke up with the other girlfriend but didn't tell Izzy. And it was a mess. I've been talking for a while now. I gave each of these 3.5 stars, every single one of them. I'd probably notch that down a little bit now. In hindsight, I'm not sure whether I'd give it a 3.5. Probably more 3s. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And here's where we come to the decision I've made about closed door rom-coms. I've decided I might not be a rom-com closed door girly. I might not be very eloquent in how I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I am a girl who tries to avoid spice, and I really feel uncomfortable with it in books. But I think it's a common thing that then we're like, well, closed door and clean romances are there for us. In some ways, yes. But I also find that with some closed doors, they still have a lot of immediate physical attraction and sort of borderline sexual content. They're not doing anything and they just kiss near the end, or they might have smooch sessions, but it's a lot of like lingering glances and oh, he's hot and abs and that sort of thing. And I realized, for me at least, I think I want to read content that encourages healthy relationships of just admiring the other person for something that isn't physical. I like hearing that they like the same things or do the same hobbies or just care outside of the more charged moments. Even just acts of service or just getting to know a person. I can admire a person just for who they are without bringing anything about attraction or could I be with this person? Do I like this person? Or should we get married? And that's kind of in the world as well. People immediately jump to, is this person available? Are they attractive? Should we date? And I'm like, oh, we can just be friends, you know? Let's garner a relationship based on mutual admiration of each other's personalities. Not to say that these books don't have any of that, but it is very physical forward. I was talking to Mum and I called it oh moments because it's like that attraction based on physical appearance or wanting to smooch them. And for me, I just feel like maybe all these books, they're easy reads. They're quick and easy. I think that's easy for me to fall into. I don't know, I think I just am wanting to focus on more wholesome content. And it's easy to slip into these books and read them, but is it really helpful to my mind? Because I don't necessarily like the more physical side of romances, then I find myself just bantering in my own mind or going off on a tangent. So it's not necessarily that I'm liking the book, it's more that I like the feeling of having something to think about, something to mull over, something to imagine alternate timelines to. Because I'm a writer, I enjoy coming up with my own stories. So I think it feeds for me the coming up with a different timeline, but I'm not exactly in line with what the book is telling. As I say, I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but you may see less of those books, or, you know, I might be taking some suggestions from Ponytails and Paperbacks. She has a few Christian books. Maybe to just try a different vein of it, see if it's just this writing style rather than the actual genre. I'm sure there's good and bad no matter what kind of genre you go into, but I might be turning more to those ones and trying them out than staying on that track. As I say, it might just be a genre thing where it's not for me, and it's just a personal conviction thing. As I say, I binged them and I had a brainless, fun, light time. So I don't think it's necessarily the book's fault or the author's fault. I don't think it's just a decision that I've personally come to. If your only impression or example of falling in love and romance is this very physical based narrative, for me, that isn't what I want or should seek in relationships. So that's my little explanation. And so hopefully I explained my own mind. I'm not very good at explaining what's going on in this noggin of mine, even though I'm a writer. I can say it through characters, but not necessarily blurt it out. So that was the Oakley Island romances, and again, I gave them all 3.5, probably more of a 3. And yeah, they were quick, fun, little closed doors. So Alright, the next book I read was Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, and it is a children's classic fiction book. And in it we're following Alice as she is with her sister and then happens to follow a rabbit and falls down a tunnel into a very strange place where everyone seems just a little mad. I've got to say, Alice in Wonderland is a nonsensical book. It is. None of the plots that are introduced are ever really closed. It's just mayhem. But they use like wordplay and puns all the way through, and so you have to be a little bit cluey to get some of the subtle like jokes or messages in the text. Yeah, it was crazy. Like, I didn't exactly love it, but I could see the art in it. Some people go through and they're like, this is just ridiculous and dumb. And I'm like, well, yes and no. Like, this is exactly like a dream. It jumps around. You have no clue what's happening. It's just random things, like the lady with her baby that turns out to be a pig, and then the pig grows up. That's very dreamlike. And you just go like, okay, we're just running with it. This is normal. And because in dreams, you start to think, this is a bit normal. Like, this is happening. Like, you just go through the motions. When in reality, you know that there's something wrong with it, but you also continue on with the dream. At least I do in mine. And there's an interesting little thing at the end where the sister, having listened to Alice retell her story, then starts thinking about all the nonsense as well. If you know anything about little kids, when they tell stories or retell things, it is mayhem and all over the place, but you adore them for that childlike, just, whoa, you're crazy, but we love you. And that's sort of what I saw Alice in Wonderland was. And so, like, I was like, do I love this? No. But I can see the art in it, and I can see why some people do like it. Because if you see all those puns, you can look past the just what's here, and you can see, like, the background, you know, nuances or subplots. Then you can see why. It is a story that sort of indicates the art of storytelling and how you can use little subtleties to tell it. But a great many will think the story is just a little mad. So in the end, I gave Alice in Wonderland a 3. I had never read it before, and now I have, so I know what the hype is. I know what the story is, and so if anyone's like, Alice in Wonderland with its blah blah blah, I'll be like, I know that. Okay, so next up I read Dark Moon, The Blood Altar. This is by Hype Entertainment with an hyphen. It's by Eyes Press. I'm going with Eyes Press. It's probably not Eyes Press, but they do Villains Are Destined to Die too. So it's the same publishing company, but Hype is the ones that, you know, created. That doesn't necessarily have an author per se. And in this we are following Suha, who is kind of an outcast. People think that she's a vampire. She isn't. And then her best friend gets killed by a vampire, and she vows to hate vampires for the rest of her life, and she goes to this school because they're very strict in not having vampires in their school. But when she enters school, she comes across these 7 blokes, and they each have a gift as well, because she too has a gift. She's very strong in a magical sort of way, but she's not a vampire, people. But she is mystically strong, and that's why people think that she is a vampire. But all these blokes, they don't outcast her because they too have special powers. And she's quite upfront about how much she hates vampires. And so they're not exactly surprised. But they might be a little bit secretive amongst their little group. They're like, oh. Now in this manhwa, it is very shoujo-like. So the main character is sort of a bit ditzy, a bit clumsy. She's blushing all the time over little things. But then again, she is a strong female lead. Literally. And like shoujo, all the guys pretty much like her straight away. They're just like, oh, she's unique. We have this draw to her for some reason. And that is why they all decide to befriend her. It is a little bit dark, especially like you open to the first page of it and straight away you get something pretty dark straight in your face. And there is a bit of death and fire and vampiric stuff and, you know, that sort of thing's going on. And there's of course a bit of mystery because the neighbouring school, which is werewolves, they blame the night school people for murdering one of their classmates who was killed by something vampiric. And meanwhile, the night school people are like, it's not us, dude. Be on your way. I mean, it's a little cliche with the werewolves versus vampires and that, but it is just a bit of a cliche story. And it's fun, and it's mysterious, and it's dark. I don't especially love the back and forth between her blushing and everything, but the mystery is kind of interesting. And there are really funny moments in it. I hee-hee-ha-ha'd my way through some of it, which was fun. So in the end, I gave this a 4 stars. I mean, it's not the greatest thing I've ever read, but as far as like the visual manhwas go, it's a pretty good start. There's nothing too complicated going on. It's just a light mystery. Alright, next up we have Before We Say Goodbye by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and it is the 4th book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. And in this we are following a cafe where if you sit in a certain seat, you can travel to the future or the past. You can't change anything that happened, but you do get to go back and make different decisions or to have a little conversation with somebody, usually dead. And there's a whole set of rules, and one of them is that you have to drink the coffee before it gets cold, otherwise you turn into a ghost that sits in that chair. There was, like, the rules get repeated about every single time there's a new person. So as you go through this series, you get those rules hammered in your head every single time, and sometimes multiple times, and they'll talk about it, and you're like, I think I get the picture. And this is really a sad and melancholy series. I mean, it's all about going and visiting, you know, relatives that have passed, and most of the time it's just sadness. But it's cute and heartwarming and heartbreaking. But there's only so many times you can tell the same pattern of death to regret to acceptance, and then, you know, moving on with this thing that they wouldn't want me to be sad. So I must live my life. Even though I love them, it's time to move on and be happy. And here's the thing, the stories aren't necessarily bad, but by this point, they are getting so repetitive. Like, you know the pattern, you know how it's gonna go. And that is why I ended up rating this a 3 stars in the end, because it's not bad. It's good. The writing is okay, other than the repetition that is definitely old by now, because, as I say, your reader isn't dumb. We can figure it out. I think by the 4th book and the 16th plus time we've heard this, we know the rules. But I am just kind of sick of feeling sad all the time. And maybe it's just my time to move on and find happiness beyond the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. You know? It's my time to move on. I visited it again and again, and now it is my time to move towards happiness and leave this behind. And the only sort of happy ending this one had was to the character I thought deserved the happy ending the least. Like, I am happy that his wife is, you know, okay, and her family can see her again, but the bloke who went back in time was a selfish git and still didn't get it by the end. And so I'm like, out of all the ones that ended up having a happy ending, it had to be a guy who I was like, you really don't deserve this, Blake. So, 3 stars for Before We Say Goodbye by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Next, we have Narnia, The Chronicles of Narnia, and we are up to The Dawn Treader. And it is a little different from the rest. We still have an overarching plot, but really it's just a little adventure to different islands, and so those islands have different things going on, and then we continue on. But as voyages go, we also have moments where it's just monotonous. We're just on the sea, the wind isn't there, or we're rowing, or, you know, there's doubt and whether we should turn back, and we're running out of supplies, and then we have supplies, and you know, and in this we are following, of course, Eustace, who is a cousin of Lucy and Edmund and Peter and Susan, and Edmund and Lucy end up staying with their aunt, and Eustace is a bit useless, and he is very mean and just stuck up and hates his cousins, really, because he thinks they're a bit crazy. He's very literal, and he thinks himself very educated. Anyway, but they end up in Narnia on the Dawn Treader, and Eustace goes through a bit of a journey. So if you like voyages and little adventures, Nothing too gripping or amazing, but it was a little voyage that is fun to read. I do think I like the movie of Dawn Treader just simply because you get to see it, and a few of their different stops, they sort of flesh out a little bit. But then there is a huge part of the Dawn Treader movie that isn't in the books, so it's like a toss-up, but I enjoyed how they portrayed the Dawn Treader movie. And for me, it was just an adventurous little journey, so I ended up giving the book 4 stars. And it was good to see Lucy and Prince Caspian, Reaper Cheap, and, you know, be introduced to Eustace and his little journey. Because he's just a little sunshine, isn't he? Anyway, that is for The Chronicles of Narnia, The Dawn Treader. Next up, we have The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. And in this, we are following Mina, whose brother is in love with the latest sacrifice to the sea god. There's been this war and mayhem and droughts and everything for a long, long time. And so each year, the people sacrifice one of their daughters to the sea to become the sea god's bride. And of course, because Mina doesn't want to see her brother heartbroken, she ends up on the boat and, you know, offers herself to the sea god and jumps into the sea. And she ends up in the spirit world. And in the spirit world, she does come across the sea god who is kind of asleep. And so as she approaches, she has this red string of fate to the sea god. But along comes a young boy called Shin, who is, you know, roughly looks the same age as our Mina. And he cuts the red string of fate, which separates her from her soul. And he's like, yep, well, you're not going to get married to the sea god. It's as a protection thingy. And, you know, you'll die without your soul in so many days. So, like, sorry, but rip. Anyway, so... But of course, our Mina, she goes and tries to get back her soul while also figuring out what is going on with the sea god. Because she's like, come on, dude. You're leaving the people, the humans who love you gods, lowercase g gods, to, like, mayhem. And meanwhile, Shin's like, well, you guys did that to yourself. You started the war. You started the mayhem yourselves. Anyway, but we're following them. And so we have the sea god, we have Shin, and we have Mina, and a whole cast of other characters in the spirit world. So you have a bit of mystery as to what's going on. But Mina also speaks about the mortal realm and sort of what has happened and different sadness and loss she's gone through and her family. And she also has a heart to try and figure out how the spirit realm is feeling on top of her own, you know, agenda to try and break the curse of the sea god so that he can come back and fix things. So there are a few plot twists and different characters going around. And I knew the identity or the true identity of several of the spirits very early on. I don't think it was really that mysterious. I don't feel like I'm that much of a detective. I think the clues were just really obvious. But I found when clues are too obvious, you're just sort of waiting around until the main character comes around to the same conclusion. The romance was good and sweet, but also near the end it was really quick and all over the place. And the ending was a little quick for me. I think we got a nice little wrap-up for the mortal realm, but we didn't really see the spirit realm wrap-up at all. And really, you spent most of your time in the spirit realm, so most of the people you're attached to are the spirit realm peeps. And then you get the mortal realm wrapped up. And there is a bit of a love triangle, not really, a love angle. And I just wasn't sure whether we really needed there to be a love angle. But I was glad that the sea god, you know, found his little bride and we had a little adventure and I did have a fun time. There were just a few things that I think could have been better paced or maybe explored a little bit more. As I said earlier, I don't especially love like spice or physical attraction romances, but at the same time I still love romance and love and relationships. And that's why even in this kind of book where it is good, but just a little bit more. Just a little more growth in their relationship before they're like, okay, we're in love, let's get married. In other words, I'm just a picky person, and my pickiness should probably calm down a little bit. But then that is also why I'm a writer, so I can write how I want it to be. And I should let other writers write how they like it. Which I do, because I gave this a 4.5. It was really good, but there were just a few things that I was like, oh, that would have made me kick my feet more. It had been just a little bit different. But again, it's good. So 4.5, just not quite a 5-star feeling for me. But that wraps up our April reading. As I say, not a really high rating month. It's kind of a middling month with the reads. I think the only books I didn't get to on my TBR was Castle of the Winds, which I read in May. I'm filming this in May, so I've already read that for May. And then Guard in the Garden, which I'm planning to read this month as well. I've started it, I just haven't finished it. So if you're waiting for those two, they are in next month's wrap up. But for now, that brings us to a close, and I hope you all had a good reading month in April. Let me know if you have any suggestions or if you read any of these and have any thoughts. And I shall see you all in the next video. So until then, peace.
T26